All right, perfect. So we're going to go through some similar topics, especially around the public cloud and the Prisma portion. We're going to go into a little bit more detail. Then we're going to open it up for questions so that you can ask questions. I'm sure you have questions based on the keynote. You're going to have questions, I'm sure, as we go through this presentation. So definitely want to go through that and give you a chance to ask those questions and talk about it. So first, who's heard of digital transformation? Who's in the middle of a digital transformation? Probably a good portion of you. I see a few hands. Where we were, from a security perspective, where we were from an organization perspective has completely changed, right? The data typically is spread out across a number of different locations in a variety of different ways. It can be spread out by the organization itself. It can be spread out by business units, by individual users, and that can be across SaaS applications, public cloud applications, and or on individual systems. And so the challenge of this digital transformation really comes into two specific things that you need to address. First one is the access to where this data resides, where these cloud applications are, where the SaaS applications are. How do you govern the access to these, control the access, and make sure that it's safe? Because the users themselves have changed as well. They're on mobile laptops, they're on phones, they're using their personal devices, they're working more and more from remote locations. How do you get them securely to the cloud without burdening them or the organization or creating latency and bad user experiences? And then how do you actually secure the applications themselves where this data is residing? And that's split into two. One of them is SaaS applications, ones that you purchase and that are managed by someone else, but you're keeping your data in. And then the other one is cloud applications, and in this case, we're talking about infrastructure as a service and platform as a service. How do you control that, manage that, and make sure that it's secure? And there's really 7 key steps to be able to do this. This is a non-linear set of steps, so it doesn't start with one and end with another. It's based on your organization's requirements, but the goal is to get through these 7 key steps to be able to secure that digital transformation and make sure that data and those users are safe. One of the key steps, and we're going to talk about today, is the mobile workforce. Like I said, they're increasingly mobile. They're going from different locations. They're often not in the organization, or there may not be a headquarters that they sit at. They may be often remote. How do you make that user experience good? Make sure that they don't have problems with latency. They don't have problems where they have to be backhauled to an organization, that they're secure because they're actually remote. They're trying to get to a cloud app. You want to get them to that cloud app as easily as possible, but maintain security. How do you connect branches? Again, not backhauling them back to a corporate headquarters, but getting that branch to those cloud applications to be able to make sure that it's secure as well. How do you control access to the cloud and make sure that you're looking at authorization and making sure there's no threats and adopting a zero trust policy? And then, of course, governance and compliance are critical. What we're ultimately doing is making sure businesses can run and that the companies that you work for are making money. And without compliance, it's not going to happen. So being sure that governance and compliance are met. And then data protection, which is looking at how is data exposed in these public cloud environments? How is data exposed in these SaaS environments, and making sure that it's controlled? Data exposed is not necessarily a bad thing. But having the context to understand that it's sensitive data that should not be exposed in a specific way is critical. And then looking at threats within these cloud environments. And threats can be a number of things. They can be malware. They can be different ways that there could be compromise. It could also be that an application isn't developed properly, that a configuration is wrong within the public cloud or within a SaaS environment. So making sure that potential threat is closed. And then you heard this morning about shifting left. You guys heard that, right? Shifting left, incorporating DevOps, looking at CI/CD pipelines, and making sure that you incorporate security earlier in the process so that it's part of the entire development cycle. And so that is the part of securing DevOps, enabling the DevOps team to be able to be secure when they develop applications. It's a challenge. They typically don't have interest in security, but making that be part of the process so that it's simple and seamless for them. So these are the key 7 steps to be able to solve. Now, they're not easy for a number of reasons, and we'll go through some of them, but one of them is there's a lot of different people in the organization with a lot of different roles using a lot of different tools. And this is really one of the biggest challenges that we see. And this may not be what your organization looks like. That makes it even more complicated because your organization may be completely different than this. It varies by organization. Who recognizes these acronyms? Perfect. Each team has a different tool that they're using. They have different things that they're trying to solve. The problem is that all these different tools are siloed. They're not sharing data. They're not giving an organizational view. They're not sharing objects. And it's making it so that there's a lot of complexity in the way that you're trying to solve those 7 steps. It's also making it so these teams aren't necessarily working together in the best way. What you want is that these teams, these different individuals in these teams, to be able to do their job because there's specific policy requirements and things that have to be done for each job that's unique to them. Endpoint device configuration versus a DLP policy versus checking configs in the public cloud, those are different requirements. They have different policies, they have different things that need to be set and managed, but having visibility across the organization, having the ability to share objects, having the ability to have that view is critical. And so that's what needs to be solved. You guys agree? Make sense? So you heard about how we're tackling this from Lee and Nikesh. We're tackling this in 3 different ways. So the enterprise piece, cornerstone of the business. It's the next-gen firewall and subscription services. What we've done is we've broken out these 2 other groups to be able to solve those specific problems. Cortex is our big data analytics, machine learning capability to look for threats, look for hidden risks, and be able to identify them and prevent them. Prisma is what we're going to talk about more today. Prisma is our cloud suite to be able to protect all those 7 steps that we just talked about for the journey to the cloud. Now, when we talk about Prisma specifically, there are 3 services within the suite. Those 3 services are Prisma for public cloud, and that's looking at infrastructure as a service and platform as a service, looking at configurations, looking at threats, protecting that environment. Prisma SaaS specifically for SaaS applications, both inline and API, so traffic to those applications as well as what's happening within them. What we're going to talk about right now in more detail is Prisma Access. And Prisma Access is specifically for the mobile and branch users to be able to connect through a cloud service, to be able to have access to these SaaS applications and the cloud applications we just talked about. So that addresses specifically the first use case that we talked about of the 2 that you needed to be able to solve, the accessing the cloud, and then the second one being the securing the cloud applications themselves. We're going to dig in a little bit more into the securing the access to these cloud applications specifically. And for that, I'm going to invite up Eli, who's Director of Product Management at, VP of Product Management.
Thank you for the promotion.
Sorry. And he's going to talk about the access portion of it.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. So usually I like to keep the audience engaged, and the stage is usually bigger, but so you apologize. I can't really walk there, else I'll fall off, it looks like. So how's everybody doing this morning? Good? Awesome. Let's see if I can figure this out. Fantastic. So this is what I want to frame the problem first. I think the problem is you have things in blue. Everybody does. Every enterprise has things in blue. Those are the managed assets, unmanaged assets, or IoT devices. I classify the IoT devices you might have in manufacturing or in your enterprise or retail store as the things in blue. Now, what are you trying to do is access the applications at the top. So decreasingly, you have applications in your data center. There used to be a lot more. There's a lot less these days. You have applications in public cloud, maybe your custom apps, and most often, like we do, you have applications that you're using that are SaaS applications, or just general internet. Now the trick is, how do you provide consistent security for the things in blue from all those locations, whether they're branch or a retail location or headquarters, or they're on the go or mobile? How do you provide exactly the same policy to all the things in blue no matter where you go? Usually, and it's hard to do if you think about it. If you think, do you have the same policy for your users if they leave the office? Like, well, no, depends, right? And you can kind of get into the details. And that's what I'm going to drill into here, is to identify what that looks like for a typical enterprise. A typical enterprise has technologies that look like this for branch and for mobile. Let's start with branch. You might have some MPLS connections back to the data center. Sounds familiar? Who's got MPLS connections? Yes, most everybody. How about site-to-site VPN instead of MPLS, if you have that? Great. So there's a lot of that going on. And in some cases, you might have secure web gateway or some proxies that are deployed for branch. And then lastly, for mobile users, you might be using just traditional remote access VPN technologies to secure your mobile users. Now, it's not that these technologies are bad, because you might be thinking, wait a minute, don't you have these? And the answer is, we do. We do have these technologies at Palo Alto Networks. We have mobile user access, that's Global Protect with PAN-OS and so on. Of course, we do site-to-site VPN. The problem is, it's bad if you have this from 6 different vendors and you're trying to have one security policy and you're trying to push that to your enterprise. Your experience is going to be different. You'll have gaps in your security posture if you have this from 6 different vendors. Even if they're all cloud vendors, it doesn't matter. You're going to have an inconsistent security policy, and that's the issue. So that's what we went after, trying to solve with Prisma Access. Make sense so far? Okay. So let's take a closer look at some of these technologies. Now, I'm not insulting your intelligence. I mean, everybody knows what MPLS and IPsec is, but let me just kind of break down each one of these and go through where they kind of break down on the consistent security side or the latency side. Now, this was great when the apps were, it's a little cut off here, I apologize for the slides, but the apps were at headquarters. When they were at headquarters, it made sense to have MPLS or IPsec site-to-site because you just brought all the traffic there and that's where your apps were. But the apps aren't there. The apps are up there most of the time, or they're migrating there, or they're mostly there. So whether it's your data center or internet, SaaS, and so on, so you take a latency hit by going through the headquarters. Now, why did you go through headquarters, or why do you still go through headquarters? It's because your security stack's there. That's another issue. You have a security stack there, you need to go through it. So that's one of the challenges. I'll talk a lot more about that. Now, what happens if you have your equipment that's in these branch locations? Most often they're routers doing MPLS. What happens if you went branch to branch? Your security stack isn't there. I've met very few companies who've replicated their entire security stack from the headquarters data center to the branch. It's really expensive to do that if you have, let's say, 10 branches. So usually you do this. You loop it through the headquarters for branch-to-branch communication. You have to go through the headquarters, go through the whole security stack, and then connect to the other branch. So again, that's a double sort of latency hit. So this is the problem with MPLS and IPsec. It's you can't replicate the security stack everywhere, and you have high latency to your applications, and you're really forcing a backhaul to get to the applications which are no longer effectively at the headquarters. The next one is looking at secure web gateway or proxies. Now, some of these are cloud services, some of these might be on-prem, but they were built for outbound web traffic security. That's what the technology was built for, proxy technology, and it works well for that. However, you saw in Taylor's presentation just a small example of if there's a malware that is downloaded to a PC or any kind of device at the branch, out of band, whatever method, the C2 for threats is very commonly not HTTP or HTTPS. It's usually DNS in the case of Taylor's demo. So in that case, a web proxy that's just proxying, H80 and 443 and other things like that won't catch C2. You kind of need some other technology around to do that. That's just one piece of information. Next is when you try to access SaaS applications, most SaaS vendors tell the proxy or secure web gateway vendors turn off the security, meaning don't turn on the security when you're accessing, let's say, I won't name actually, I was going to, when you're accessing a popular SaaS application that lots of people use for email. And the secure web gateway proxy vendors listen to that and they don't apply any security modules on that traffic, which is, if you ask any of the users of these secure web gateway technologies, they know that and they know it's a gap. Customers know it's a gap. So that's what I want to point out here. It's not inspected, that's why it's red. Next is, can you use it for site-to-site? Of course not. It's not built for site-to-site. Proxy technologies are not built for that. So you have another vendor in your suite of vendors that you have to deploy. If you're using a proxy, you by default have something else for site-to-site. You've got MPLS, you've got IPsec, or something. That's another security vendor. So now you have 2 consoles. You couldn't possibly write a common policy that applies. That's exactly the same. Lastly, can it be used for remote access? There's only one vendor that I know that tries to do this, and the solution is terrible. I don't know if anybody knows what I'm talking about, but as I describe it, you can chuckle and I'll get that you know what I'm talking about. So there's one company that for remote access, or what Gartner is now calling software-defined perimeter, you have to put a VM in front of every application that you want secure that's at your data center or in your VPC. You run a VM, the VM phones home to the cloud, and then you connect to the cloud with whatever software they give you, and the cloud brokers that connection. That means you have to run those VMs in your infrastructure, pay for the power, the cooling, the hypervisor, the licenses, the care and feeding of that VM, just so that it can phone home to the cloud so you can access your applications. There's only one vendor that is doing this, but it's not built for that. Secure Web Gateway or proxies are not built for remote access, as much as their marketing would allow you to think it does, like in the SDP or Beyond Corp-like way. It doesn't work that way. Okay, so those are the problems there. Now let's look at SD-WAN. SD-WAN, a great technology. How many here use SD-WAN or are investigating SD-WAN? Okay, a fair number. So it's great. We have about a dozen SD-WAN partners today at Palo Alto Networks working with Prisma Access. Now the issue is it's sort of similar to MPLS. The apps are not there. They're there. So you're kind of doing this backhaul. And you might say, well, wait, there's some SD-WAN vendors that have cloud solutions. They're a cloud-based SD-WAN, and they have security. But in my experience, it's an SD-WAN company that has some security. That's very basic. So then you have now your data center firewalls, which are not the SD-WAN vendor. It's probably us. We have over 60,000 customers. So it's probably us at the perimeter of your network or another major firewall vendor. And then you have this that you're trying to use to secure your branches with some security in it. So again, multiple consoles, different security posture, a gap in your security posture overall. And so you have then to make a poor choice. You have an SD-WAN vendor with poor security or security vendors that have poor SD-WAN technologies. So you're kind of stuck. Our approach is to have a best-of-breed security and best-of-breed SD-WAN, which is the reason we're partnering with some of the major SD-WAN vendors out there. Lastly, this is probably very common for most, is the legacy or remote access VPN, where you have 1 or 2 or 3 data centers and you have users all over the world and they VPN into 1 or 2 locations. Now, it's not an ideal experience for the user because they've gone on a business trip like here or worse, let's say Tokyo, Europe, somewhere far, Australia, and your data centers in the United States. That experience for that user is not going to be very good. Or you've compromised and you said, well, let's just do split tunneling, so that most of the internet stuff just goes out and I only want to tunnel the stuff that belongs to my network. But those apps, most of the apps are SaaS apps. So you basically have no visibility on what your users are doing and you can't secure it because you're not seeing it. You've made that compromise because you can't have both good experience for latency and security. So those are the sort of approaches or challenges with traditional approaches. I showed you it's inconsistent security posture, high operational cost, because you have multiple vendors, whether they're on-prem vendors with hardware or cloud vendors. It's still going to cost a lot to train your people, operate, and so on. A poor user experience, given you might have many clients installed or agents installed on laptops, like a proxy, maybe pack file in the browser, and then a remote access VPN, and they have to use both and know when to use both, or captive portals for multiple layers of authentication. Generally, a poor user experience with multiple technologies. And then lastly, a high latency to applications, which I've shown you. Okay, so the Palo Alto Networks approach is to have a consistent security posture, because we're a vendor that has a presence in cloud, a presence on-prem. As Lee said, you have to have both. You have to be a vendor that has both to be able to play. Operational efficiency, given that we're delivering all this from the cloud, and a consistent user experience, given that you install Global Protect, which is our agent on the phones or laptops, and that's all you run. And the user doesn't have to make a decision on, should I use this browser that has a proxy file, or can I use my own browser? Do I have to start up the VPN or not? It detects whether you're on or off the network. It could be always on, very simple. And an optimized path to the app, since we're delivering this from public cloud. So we're close to where the SaaS applications are, close to the users. You heard Adam, and I'll talk about it here too, where we've expanded our footprint from 15 locations to over 100. So that gets us close to the users and the apps. Okay, so this is the overall, the Prisma vision, where we have a connectivity layer, and you have the things in blue that I mentioned earlier, in dark blue at the bottom, from the locations, and they're trying to access the applications at the very top. Now, you need connectivity methods, or various connectivity methods, to get somebody connected to the cloud. That could be an SSL VPN or IPsec, that would be the agent. SD-WAN, we have, again, about a dozen partners or so. We have a new use case coming up which is called Clean Pipe for telcos. And lastly, Clientless VPN if you're, let's say, for SAML proxy, which Adam touched on earlier. Those are the connectivity methods to get you connected to the cloud. The next thing you need to do is replicate your security stack that you had at corporate, so you don't have that problem of having to force the traffic to the headquarters before you access your applications. So we have Prisma Access on the left. On the far right, we have Prisma SaaS. And then we have all the subscriptions that you might recognize: threat protection, wildfire, URL filtering, and so on, and some of the next-gen firewall technologies, user ID, app ID. So, and DLP, which is an upcoming service of ours, very, very key. If you didn't notice that, that's a highly anticipated new service that we're going to be coming out with, which is a DLP. So the essence here is that you're replicating the stack you had on premise in the cloud, so you don't have to make that compromise of bringing the traffic to the headquarters. And lastly, all managed with a new cloud management, which I'll give you sort of a preview, a little bit more detail on what Adam showed you this morning. And what we do is we log all of our logs and all the events of the Prisma suite to Cortex Data Lake, which is where you can, again, consume additional applications and leverage all that data. Okay, so let me talk quickly about the use cases. There's two main use cases for Prisma Access. How many of you knew what Global Protect Cloud Service was before it got renamed to Prisma Access and what the use cases were, POCs, evals, or you're a customer? Just show of hands so I know how much detail to give. Okay. So it's new for most of you. So basically we have two use cases. We have a mobile user use case, which connects the users at the bottom. Oh, sorry. I'm not sure if you can see the animation there. There might be some dots missing. But so there's mobile users at the bottom connecting to the connectivity layer with our SSL VPN IPsec. And that gets you connected to our infrastructure that's running in the cloud. And we have now 15 locations that we're currently serving the cloud service out of, which was hosted in AWS initially. But with our Google partnership that we announced in December, we're expanding that this month, in the month of June, with our release to over 102, it's 102 exactly, locations in 76 countries. So it's AWS plus GCP is what our footprint will look like by the end of the month. And that gets you connected to the applications at the top, going through that security layer that I mentioned. That's our first use case. Some of the benefits there are that you don't have to worry about, well, should we do split tunneling or always on? With our service, we pay for the compute and the bandwidth. We automatically scale it. We handle if you have a snowstorm and everybody works from home, or an event like this where everybody's doing remote access for an entire week. That scalability, we're absorbing that. And if you want to go to an always-on posture, you're not worried that, because I backhaul everything to my corporate headquarters, I'm going to get all the YouTube and Hulu and Facebook traffic now. We don't want that, so we're going to leave it as split tunneling. With a service like this, you don't have to worry about that. You can have the posture, the security posture you want. Okay? The next thing is, again, I apologize for the dots missing in the, or the lines missing in the middle, but for branch is our second use case, which connects branch offices, so corporate branch offices or retail locations with an IPsec tunnel. So we don't really need a Palo Alto Networks device at the remote branch. It can be anything that supports IPsec, and that's really important for M&A, or if you have an SD-WAN device that's sitting there in the branch, you can onboard it with IPsec, and then we create a full mesh in the cloud for you, so that the plumbing is there in case any one of those sites needs to talk to any one of those other sites. Of course, your security policy has to say, branch A could talk to B, or branch A could talk to headquarters, and so on. But we do that plumbing for you. So those are the two main use cases that we have for Prisma Access, is mobile user connectivity and branch/retail or remote networks in general. Now, there's some interesting use cases to branch too. I'll mention is that a branch to us could also be a VPC. You could onboard your public cloud VPC with an IPsec tunnel and then secure those applications or give developers access to those applications securely. So some very creative use cases. It's also used for IoT, in case an IoT device supports IPsec instead of client. So it doesn't just mean branch, like a branch office. It means a remote network in general. Okay. So let's just focus a little bit on the Prisma management part here. I wanted to show you a preview of what the management looks like. How many of you used the plugin in Panorama called the Cloud Services plugin to manage Global Protect Cloud Service before? One? Okay. So on a scale of 1 to 10, the ones that raised their hand, just shout out the sort of how many steps it took or the level of difficulty to get up and running with the cloud services plugin? Too many steps. Somebody else was over here, they raised their hand? 7 steps? Or level 7. Okay, right. 7 on 10. So we've drastically simplified the number of steps you need in order to get up and running with this new cloud management. I'm really, really excited for this. It's coming up in July, so next month. And now we basically just jump into the most popular use cases. We figured out how our customers are deploying mobile users and remote networks and which settings they use mostly. So we basically here ask you for what is the name of your portal. So we ask you for your name. It could be our domain or your domain. And we ask you what regions do you want, because some customers don't want to operate in all the regions that we offer for various reasons. They might want to shrink it down to US only or Canada only or UK only and so on, or all, depends. So you pick your regions, and then you've created some test accounts. So to get you up and running quickly, you can create some test accounts with local users. Like here, Kevin, Angela, Toby, or Eli, or something like that. And then you click next, and then we deploy in all the locations where you told us to deploy. And it's here it's showing that's up and running, but there's of course no users logged in yet. That's the next step. That's where it's fully deployed. And then there's a dashboard showing how many tunnels have you created for remote networks. The example I showed you is mobile users, the tile next to it. And it shows how many current users you have and trending information on connectivity, current user count, and a graph sort of over time, and so on. So a very, very nice UI, a large improvement over what we had before. However, if you are a Palo Alto user, firewalls on premise, and you're using Panorama, we're not forcing you to use the cloud management. You can still use Panorama with the plugin and manage your on-prem Palo Alto hardware and VM series and and Prisma Access from the same place. Or you can optionally just use this for Prisma Access management. Can you use both? You can. You can use both. You mean separately? Yes, you can use. Oh, not yet. Not yet. The synchronization to use both simultaneously, not yet. But that's on the roadmap. Good question. Okay, so on the map part of roadmap, I wanted to talk about the expansion of the cloud service. We initially had these locations. These are the 15 locations that we launched with in AWS, as I mentioned. And then now we've expanded to all these. You saw this in Adam's, just a different animation in Adam's demo this morning. It's really, really important. So I want to focus on especially what we do to do this right. Some other cloud services, I want to mention just a couple points here, is they host this in private data centers. And we chose public cloud for a very specific reason. And that was so that we don't have to make the data plane multi-tenant. So in some cloud services, they've had to deploy racks of equipment and so on, and they're sharing the data plane between tenants. So that means when you egress the service and you're going to applications, SaaS applications, and you want to whitelist it, for example, your IP that you're egressing with is the same as your competitor's IP. It's not that secure to do that. So we've, on purpose, by design, have segregated the data plane where your data plane is not the same data plane as somebody else, and we have an API for you to go fetch what are the IPs we've assigned to you, so you can go whitelist your SaaS applications. And then with the expansion of the locations, we also registered our own IP space and registered it in the countries where we're operating so that you can actually have an experience that is highly localized. Adam touched on that as well. Okay, so for example, this. So if you're in the US, you have a hello. If you go to Office 365 or any other SaaS application, in France, it would be bonjour, and in Latin America, hola, right? So that's what we've done in order to ensure that you have the right experience. It's not just operating in the countries, it's all those other things I said. You need a dedicated data plane, a set of IPs registered in country with the right databases that register IPs to countries, and operating public cloud to have the scalability. It's many pieces to do it right. With that, I'm going to turn it back to Chris to wrap up. There you go.
Thanks, Eli.
Sure. Thanks.
All right, so we talked about access, and just to reiterate what Eli just said, what you just saw from a UI perspective, that was a fully cloud-delivered service for Prisma Access. So the people that are responsible for configuring and monitoring Prisma Access and the access portion of the business have that view. That view is pulling data from the data lake to be able to give that visibility and allows configuration. Now, what if we step back and we look at the bigger picture? More than just Prisma Access, Prisma Public Cloud, Prisma SaaS. How do we get the full view of what's happening across all those cloud transformation steps to be able to understand what the company looks like from a cloud perspective overall? And that's where we're introducing the hub. And the Prisma hub is pulling data from all these different services. It's pulling data from the data lake. It's pulling data from the SaaS applications. It's pulling data from the public cloud protections that we're doing. It's pulling that all into one single view for the cloud overall. And so you have the ability to do both of the things that I talked about that were the challenge. How do I define policies and do the things that I need to do specific to my one role, but how do I also share data and have the larger view? So if I want to go in to what Eli just showed, I can go to Prisma Access. I can configure things specific for that role, the things that I want to be able to do. If I want to go into a SaaS specific view, I can go into Prisma SaaS. I can configure the SaaS policies, which is much more of a DLP-based policy for SaaS applications. And then I can do the same for public cloud to be able to do configurations for compliance checks and configuration monitoring for the public cloud. If I want to see what's happening overall, I have this dashboard, which is what I view when I first come in. This dashboard gives me the ability, and sorry, I hope I didn't give you motion sickness. That dashboard gives you the ability to understand what's happening at a cloud level, what's happening for my compliance, what's happening from a threat perspective, what's happening from a resource and asset perspective, how does my risk profile look? And that's really the challenge when we look at cloud. Having risk is not necessarily a bad thing. We all know that. That's what our jobs are. That's what the CISO's job is to mitigate risk and to understand it. The thing that's not okay is not knowing risk. And so that's what we're trying to solve here, is to give you the visibility of the risk and the ability to control that risk across the entire cloud. And so this is a big step for being able to have that view and be able to control that across an entire organization. And that's not the only place that we've gone to be able to do that. We also, as we talked a little bit about, integrate into Cortex Data Lake. That's how we get a lot of this data. That's how we have the ability to understand what's happening within the organization. But it's not just the cloud services. Cortex Data Lake is a solution that actually goes well beyond that, where it's the network devices, the VMs, the firewalls, the endpoints are participating in it, the cloud services are participating in it, and we're using that to be able to do that machine learning to look for risks. And that's really what cloud, the XDR for Cortex does. It looks at the entire organization, which includes cloud, but it includes all the rest of it as well. So it's a bidirectional process through the data lake, where the individual components, where you're doing SaaS and you're doing the access component, they're learning from the data lake and using that. But also from a SOC perspective, you can look across the entire organization, understand the threat, and be able to mitigate that across the organization through Cortex XDR. So it is a suite for cloud, and it integrates into the larger Cortex as well. So those pillars that we talked about, Prisma and Cortex, they do work together to be able to provide that capability. So with that, we're solving the kind of main challenges. We talked about how do I do my job and have visibility across the organization and be able to do that so they work together. We're able to look at across the cloud and understand the risk of the data and the assets within those environments, both the access component and what's happening within them. We have consistent security across those environments. So if you're a mobile user, if you're at a branch office, if you're accessing SaaS applications, same security, same capability. So you're not limiting one versus the other, and you don't have to choose between them. You know that you have the same security capability that you had on-prem, now available to everyone regardless of the location, what they're accessing. And for the cloud, it really all comes down to speed and agility. That's first and foremost what we're using the cloud for, to be able to move quickly and manage that very rapidly, and we can't get in the way of that from a security perspective. And then the last one is reducing the complexity of deployment and the operating costs. And the only way to do that is to use services from a security perspective that are designed to be able to fit in these environments. We're not adding on services after the fact to solve the cloud challenges. They're specifically being built and purchased, as you heard about today, to be able to solve these problems, to integrate into a larger offering. And so that's exactly what we're offering here, and that's what we're excited to talk about.